Thanks. All right, thank you, everybody. I just drove down this morning from Edmonton, and it's always nice to speak to a room with so many chronic underachievers, such as yourself. So I thought I would, I've got 40 minutes or so to talk about lessons I've learned from 17 years at BioWare, as Derek said. So how I want to do that is I want to tell you a little bit about myself, first of all. Then I'm going to take you through the games industry, exactly the shape of it, not just globally, but here in Canada, to give you some context for that. And then I'm going to get into the nitty-gritty details of the history of BioWare, lessons learned along that way, and then really try to focus on 5 key takeaways that I have based on putting this presentation together and things that I've really helped to understand just leaving BioWare in the summer as I did. And then lastly, some perspectives over those 3 months, things that I think are really important takeaways, things to think about at a conference such as this. So the worst part of these presentations is talking about yourself, but I'll try that. I got my computing science degree from the U of A in 2000, and I joined BioWare directly out of school. I was lucky enough to land a job right there. I actually started before I was even done my degree because they needed somebody that badly in those times. As anybody doing a startup will know, you need people to get working on things. I was a programmer, and then over time in my career, I transitioned into more and more leadership roles at the company, taking on more and more technical management, more and more technical strategy stuff, until eventually I took on the technology portfolio for the entire business, at which point then we were acquired by EA, a big multinational publisher out of San Francisco. And at that time, too, I made another career transition where I switched away from technical leadership and into strategy and operations leadership. I felt pretty under-equipped to do that, having been a programmer most of my life. I was decent at math, and that's about the only thing you've got going for you in those things. And I was pretty good working with teams. So I went and got my MBA in 2014, and that was a big help. And then lastly, I left the studio in the summer of 2017 to do more things like this. I really enjoy speaking at these kind of things. I learn a ton. It's amazing the kinds of connections you can make here and the power of those connections. So I like doing this kind of thing now. So let's talk a little bit about the games industry itself. This is a revenue snapshot for the games industry from 2016 through to 2020. And you can see that it is a $100+ billion industry. A lot of people are surprised at the scope and the magnitude of that. They think, oh, it's not quite that big. No, it's enormous. It's grown in North America, but it's grown even more in places like China and Korea, South Korea. They are amazingly popular forms of entertainment over there, and they represent sort of the cutting edge of where entertainment is around the world nowadays. In Canada here, we have just under 600 active studios or game development organizations in the country. Which is, again, is a high number for a lot of people. People think, oh, there's only a few of them. You may have heard of BioWare, you may have heard of Electronic Arts in Vancouver, or you may have heard of Ubisoft in Montreal. But there's actually 596 of various sizes. And I think the more compelling statistic in this area is that it's growing. It's up 21% since 2015. These are 2017 stats, by the way. And so it's really growing, and it's where a lot of dollars are being invested because we know there's markets for that, and we know that people love this entertainment space, and they love their games. Contributes $3.7 billion annually to Canada's GDP. Canada is a surprising hotbed for this. There's a lot of game development studios and a lot of talent here. Just over 40,000 jobs in Canada are dedicated to game development. And then lastly, some demographics on just who the people are who play these games. I think there's some pretty compelling, interesting stats here that, again, tend to surprise people. The first is that 52% of Canadians identify themselves as gamers in that they've played a game in the last 4 weeks. And the average age is 36 years old. So the stereotype of that young person playing in their parents' basement all night, while definitely true, is not the norm and is not the everyday person who plays games here in Canada. And then lastly, I think what is very compelling is the fact that the gender split for these demographics is pretty much equal. Again, this idea of a stereotype of, it's young males playing games. While there are a lot of young males that play games, I'm proud to say that the games industry is very inclusive and supports many, many people, both men and women. So let's talk now about the history of BioWare. So BioWare, if you don't know this, was founded actually by 3 medical doctors, Ray Muzyka, Greg Zeschuk, and Augustine Yip, back in '95. And what a lot of people don't know, though, is that how they formed it was they had a childhood friend, Ray and Greg had a childhood friend who was actually developing a game in Calgary. And as part of the deal to support him in finishing his game, they moved the studio up to Edmonton. So BioWare could have been in Calgary had it not gone that way, but it ended up in Edmonton because of the support of Ray and Greg. That game they were working on, they took over, was called Shattered Steel, and it was released in 1996. And the good news was, like many startups, many early ventures, it was successful enough to get your next project. And that's really an important lesson, which is Ray and Greg and Og and everybody else were smart enough that they didn't worry too much about something being taking over the world with that first product. They wanted to get that first step taken, get this game done, and then see where the next part of the journey took them. And luckily, that took them to their next game called Baldur's Gate, and that was the game that really put them on the map. So that game came out in 1998. It was an enormous amount of effort from the studio to get it done. There were financial resources to hire people and to scale up and get a little bigger, but that was just a huge effort from the staff in Edmonton to get that game done. And when it came out in 98, it was launched to very much critical acclaim, won a bunch of awards, and it really reinvented the computer role-playing genre. Role-playing games are the kind of games you take on the role of a character, and you put all your personality in that character, and you play, and you have choices, and you do those kind of things. It's the kind of games that BioWare became known for. And that was the game that really put BioWare on the map, and it sold enough copies that it really cemented BioWare's future as a studio capable of building big, large-scale games and doing more and more of that. So then they did a game called MDK2, and MDK2 was a different kind of game. And this was a chance for Ray and Greg and the founders to try to see which way they're going to go. And Derek mentioned the word pivot. And MDK2 was a different genre of game, a different kind of game. But after it came out, it did well. But it was clear that Baldur's Gate and the role-playing game space was where BioWare should be. It was more successful. It was more critically acclaimed. And so that again, gave them the confidence they needed to march forward building computer role-playing games. So they made the sequel to Baldur's Gate called Baldur's Gate 2 in 2000. That's when I actually joined. I joined about 6 months before that game came out, and I was responsible for doing a lot of the work on the tools of that game. And so Baldur's Gate 2, again, very critically acclaimed, even more successful than Baldur's Gate 1, as these games tend to be. Unlike other forms of entertainment, games tend to grow their audiences over time, whereas many times you see sequels in Hollywood, they tend to be smaller. Games actually keep growing their audience and keep pulling people in. So Baldur's Gate 2, very successful game, and really, again, helped give everybody confidence in BioWare for future projects. They did another game in 2002 called Neverwinter Nights. This was a very innovative game. This was the first 3D role-playing game out there, one of the first 3D role-playing games. It had a lot of really interesting technology in it, including a tool set. So this was something you gave to fans, and the fans could build their own content for their game in Neverwinter. Really innovative at the time, and it was also very successful. But the one game that really seemed to spark everybody's imagination and interest was a game called Star Wars Knights of the Republic. This was an official Star Wars game. At the time, Lucas they did not want to make their own games. They signed a lot of publishing deals with other developers to do these kinds of games, and so BioWare was privileged enough to get the rights to build this game. Big 3-year project, and it really did a lot for the studio. It was on a console, which means you were playing in your living room as opposed to on your computer in your office. And the fact that it had the Star Wars name attached to it was a real endorsement for what BioWare is capable of and what it was doing. So it's at that point then that the studio made another pivot and made a very important strategic shift, which was with all the success that we were having at the studio, we're very confident in our ability to make more games. That wasn't the issue. But the real question was what kinds of games were we going to make? And more specifically, were we going to continue to make games that were based on other people's intellectual property, other people's, which are licensing deals, right? Or are you going to start to make your own universes, your own worlds from scratch, build the kinds of characters and the kinds of stories that really are all your own? And that was the change that we made at the studio at that time. So we walked away from a lot of those licenses. We aren't going to make Dungeons & Dragons games anymore. We're not going to make Star Wars games anymore, although we did. We're going to make our own games. And so we shifted internally to make what became Jade Empire, which was the first game to come out in that space. Jade Empire, again, wholly owned by BioWare, something that started in someone's office from scratch on a blank sheet of paper versus getting all that information about what's an entertainment licensed product from somewhere else. And that game came out and did quite well, but unfortunately it came at the very end of the console cycle. There's another console coming out, so people weren't buying too much of them. But it was, again, critically acclaimed. And at that time, we got purchased by a venture capital firm who invested a lot of money into the studio. And the next big new IP that we were working on, called Mass Effect, came out. And Mass Effect went on to be very successful, eventually sold 20 million copies total of all the 3 games around the world. And that game came out, and it was that game that got us sold to Electronic Arts in 2008. That deal closed in January. We were part of a sale of another studio. BioWare and Pandemic were bundled together and sold to EA for $860 million US, so it was a very big deal at the time. And it sparked a real wave of consolidation and purchases in the games industry. You know, I'm sure people know 2008 was the start of a worldwide recession, and so that really started this consolidation phase. As part of EA, which BioWare still is today, we did a next game called Dragon Age Origins, which is, again, very, very popular and very successful. In 2010, we shipped the sequel to Mass Effect, which was hugely successful for us. It was one of the highest rated games of all time on critics' sites. And then a really big project started in Austin, Texas, came out in 2011 called Star Wars: The Old Republic. This was an enormous undertaking. It's definitely the biggest game I've ever seen get made in my life. It had, I think, over 500 people on it at one point just to get it done. Just a huge, huge endeavor. Tons of very talented people putting in a lot of hard work to get this game done. And that game still runs today. This was another part of the strategic shift away from just making straight-up games that you buy on a disc and play for a while and walk away from. This was an important strategic shift towards what's called a service, where you're paying month to month and you're engaging with the game constantly and you're getting new content. Not unlike Netflix, the games industry was doing some of that stuff almost 10 years ago. So then Mass Effect 3 came out in 2012, again, very critically acclaimed. Our founders, Ray and Greg, retired in 2012, and then at that time I ended up taking over the rest of BioWare at that time. We shipped another game called Dragon Age Inquisition in 2014, and that game went on to win the Game of the Year award from over 150 different publications. It was very successful for us. A really fun game to work on, too. We used some new technology in that game, which was really cool. Technology's always been a passion of mine. I really enjoy getting into some of the really hardcore technology problems, and Dragon Age certainly gave us our fair share of those. Then we shipped a less acclaimed game in 2017 as the industry was shifting again. And finally, the next new big IP from BioWare called Anthem was announced this summer, and it'll ship sometime next year, hopefully, and it'll be amazing as well. So that's kind of the product history of BioWare, the kinds of games we made, some of the strategic shifts we made. But there's a few lessons in there that I think we can take away and we can really look at when you're talking about startup and starting a business. So you can break those time frames into about 5 acts, and that's what I've done here. And I think there's a really key lesson learned during each of those 5 acts, and I'll try to share those with you first. The first was starting up, just trying to get our feet underground, trying to build our first game. As we're trying to build that game, the thing to remember is that not only you're trying to build a product for the market, you're also trying to build a culture within your organization, right? And so some of these values become really important. They become things that you will embrace for a very long time. And so as we're trying to get these games done early on to cement our reputation, the first big value we were learning was quality in the products. That's what Ray, our founder, called it. Quality in the products is this idea that you don't have much you can go on when you're a startup, but you can build something very high quality. You can build something people will appreciate, especially in the entertainment industry. That's really critical. And so you do that, and then trusting that if you build something that's very good and you build something that people will appreciate, then you will sell enough copies, you will make enough money that you can come back and do it again and do it again. As we did that a few times, we realized that the games industry is very difficult and involves a lot of extra hard work and overtime and such. And so another value was incorporated in there based on those lessons, which we called quality in the workplace. And that lesson was really meant to be about this idea of sustainability, and this idea that if Ray and Greg really wanted us to be around, or wanted the studio to outlast them, and luckily it did, it has, then we have to have a sustainable model for game development in there. We have to have practices which support employees. We have to have practices which engage them and allow them to have feedback and allow them to dialogue with the studio leadership so that we have a chance to improve things and keep things going and getting better and better every single time we do a project. Within the studio itself, the things that players don't necessarily see. Then we made that strategic shift away from doing licensed games, taking other people's intellectual property and building that, And that was a really hard lesson to incorporate because, of course, you've got all these things that you love making and you know are successful, and you have to take a step away from that and say, we're going to try to build things on our own, which is riskier, which is more challenging, but what we think is ultimately going to be even more successful because we know this business very well and we don't have to just take things from other people. So we accepted this new lesson, which we called planning over plans, this idea that plans are great. As Mike Tyson said, everyone's got a plan till they get punched in the face. Plans are great, and they're the kinds of things you have to commit to, but by the same token, the art and the essence and the skill of planning is even more important. And so we embraced that idea because we didn't have a lot of the hand-holding that you get from having someone else's intellectual property to work with. We had to go with our own things. And so by going with your own things, you've got to embrace feedback, you've got to really test things hard, you've got no guardrails, no safeties on any of this stuff, so you've got to really test things hard, and you've got to change the culture so that it gets better at that. But then we were acquired by EA, and at that point, we were in a whole new environment. We're not just a company of a few hundred people anymore. We're part of a company of 8,000 developers. And so you have to realize that if you're going to succeed and go forward in that, there is a power in the ecosystem there. There is a power in embracing all of the diversity and all of the experiences that exist in this large organization and trying your best to incorporate those into your own studio, into your own teams, to get better and to do even more interesting things. There are technology teams at EA that are doing some of the most cutting-edge work on the planet. How can you take lessons from them? How can you use what they're doing into your own games and do those things? So that became the next big cultural revolution we went through. How do we incorporate all that diversity that exists now in the larger company and feed it into the games and make the games better as a result? And then lastly, where we're at now, which is the classic innovator's dilemma. And I'm sure you've all heard of the innovator's dilemma and what it means. It's a really tough time in the industry right now because there's more money going into the games industry than ever, but it's also never been a harsher environment. It's really, really hard to make a game that is wildly successful nowadays because there is so much competition. And there's new technologies that are coming out every day. Almost every game now is online. Almost every game now is a service. And so the bar for entry is very, very high, and you have to compete at an extraordinarily high level to do that. And the challenge, of course, is that you make things. We've made things at BioWare for 20 plus years, and sometimes you have to take a step away from those things again and try to make new things. And so that's what Anthem is supposed to be, an attempt to do something quite different and quite new and quite novel for the studio that will be market-driven and the market will really appreciate. So I want to go into each of those lessons learned a little more in detail. So, and I've got a quote up in the top right of the presentation. Top right? Yeah, top right. Which I think is meant to really embrace what these lessons are. So when we first took on that quality in the products idea, obviously we're a startup. The studio is on a shoestring budget in many ways. Everybody's working a lot of hours, as you do. And you have to stay very focused on this idea that if you build something great, that's your best shot you have at success. Obviously, there are things you can do to encourage that, and there are things you can do to set yourself up for success. But really, the only thing you know is that you want to build something that is going to be really respected and really appreciated and solve a problem for people. It's tough to solve problems for people when you're making entertainment, right? Entertainment is not inherently a problem-solving exercise. Entertainment is fun. Entertainment is something that is supposed to be embraced and enjoyed. It doesn't fix a pain point for them necessarily in their lives, with the possible exception of there's a form of entertainment that doesn't exist for them, which you can do. And certainly BioWare did do its fair share of that. BioWare brought in a lot of really interesting innovations into the entertainment space, into this role-playing game space, which were, called them unscratched itches for people, and really helped them realize there's fun stuff to do in these games. However, making this kind of stuff with entertainment, it's inherently a choice to go be entertained, and you've got a lot of choices. So you have to choose to make something very high quality, very appreciated by fans and by players, so that you have a chance at getting your stuff sold and them coming back and playing more. So like I said, we didn't know much at the beginning. All we knew was that we had to make great games. And so what's interesting is the stories of how those games got made, the stories of lessons learned in making those quality products, became the kinds of stories that get told to every single new person who joins the studio. And that's That's the definition of a culture to my mind, is the stories that you tell, the stories that get shared around, the way you see things get decided upon, the way you see things get judged. Those original stories of how you make high-quality experiences became the fundamental foundation for the culture of BioWare, and we see that all through even today. But then we realized that you can't just throw everything you've got at these games every single time you make one. You, in fact, have to find a way to do that sustainably. And BioWare is very fortunate in that there are many, many studios out there who start up and who find themselves gone after 3-5 years. But BioWare has stood the test of time and is still working away very hard on its next game 20-plus years after it was founded. And that's a credit to Ray's and Greg's, our founders' ability to recognize that a sustainable culture, something that takes feedback, incorporates change into the culture as you are scaling up, as you are growing, as you're evolving, is really key to that message of sustainability. You can't sustain yourselves if you can't evolve and adjust and make slight changes and keep the culture moving forward. So Ray and Greg built this culture of quality in the workplace and this value of quality in the workplace into the culture, which allowed us to be introspective and to make changes we had to, such that we could be sustainable and be there for the long term. And I like that quote from Peter Drucker, culture eats strategy for breakfast. We really learned that through this time. We realized how important it was not only to have a culture, realized how many decisions get made not because of the strategy you set, but because of the culture. But we realized also what a draw this culture could be to talent across the industry. There are many people who chose to seek out BioWare because they'd heard that we had these core values of things like quality in the workplace. And as a result, they felt that was a more sustainable place to be, a better place to be. And so they started moving from all over the world to join BioWare. And that was a really important step in our evolution, having all these amazingly talented people move from places like Southern California or Europe or even Southeast Asia and Australia, ending up in Edmonton of all places to join a video game company. But then I think the most important strategic shift the company ever made happened in 2003. We'd made one of our most successful games of all time, Star Wars: The Old Republic. We were getting crazy support and adulation from around the industry. And we decided that we were going to step away from making games that were strictly other people's intellectual property, and we were going to start making our own. We made Mass Effect and Dragon Age. These are universes and game experiences which exist only because there are people who took a blank sheet of paper and started writing this stuff down. And that was an enormously scary shift to make inside the studio. There were those of us, myself included, very intimidated by that change, very, very concerned about leaving this track record of success that we had and walking away from games that we knew our fans wanted, the easy money, quote unquote, because we were going to make games that we thought being the master of our own destiny, of controlling every aspect of that game, was going to be a brighter future for us long term. Very scary time, very concerning time, but again, credit to all the leadership involved for steering us through that and getting us through that. I learned a lot in that particular time. Personally, I was becoming more and more responsible for team members at this time, and I can remember having to not only communicate to these people, communicate to team members why this was important, what we had to do, but also convincing myself at the same time this was the right thing to do. And it was absolutely the right thing to do. There's a lot of power in partnerships and a lot of power in working with someone else's intellectual property, but you're also just making them rich at the end of the day by making high-quality experiences for them. In this case, making your own universes, making your own things that players can love and appreciate was incredibly valuable for us and represented the way forward. But again, a very scary time, and we had to embrace this idea of planning, of getting very good at planning versus just having plans that were given to us or we drew up on day one and just had to make a game out of it. And I like Eisenhower's quote here, plans are worthless, but planning is everything. There's actually a surprising number of ways that quote is presented when you look for it, but that's the one I found that is nice and convenient and easy to use. So plans are worthless, but planning is everything. A very important lesson we learned as we scaled up and shifted and walked away from all these experiences we'd made for the previous 5 or 7 years of the company, and then finally worked on these. The next lesson was that power of the ecosystem. As we were purchased by EA almost 10 years ago now, we found ourselves inside a huge company with all sorts of resources that we could use, all sorts of talented people, all sorts of money available to make games. We had to find ways way up in Edmonton to tap into that and to realize that we weren't going to survive and weren't going to be successful unless we did that and took advantage of those opportunities that were presented. So we also scaled up at this time. We had a studio in Austin, Texas. We created a studio in Montreal. We took over a few other studios that were currently part of Electronic Arts. We did this, and we had to find ways to leverage all those things and take advantage of those things. I really like that quote on diversity, the art of thinking independently together, how you keep people aligned towards a vision and towards making something, while at the same time embracing their diverse perspectives and finding ways to work with them is very difficult, but ultimately extremely fruitful and something that I would encourage everybody to do as you try to scale up your organization. Find a way to embrace diversity in thinking, find a way to embrace diversity of experiences, find a way to embrace diversity at all levels in your team members. And if you can get all those diverse people to think independently together, you've got a winning formula there, I think. And certainly that's a lesson that I've learned as I've left BioWare. And then the last major lesson, again, is this innovator's dilemma. All these things that were successful for us for the past 20 years, story-based games, games that had a lot of writing in them, a lot of those things, now maybe not so successful. So how do we, because the market has shifted, how do we keep doing what we're doing, what we love to do, but do it in a package and do it in a way that is going to be successful in the marketplace, as our previous games were? And that is really the challenge we face now. That's the challenge that now other people smarter than me, hopefully, are going to work on and take over for the studio. But that's how it goes, and that's what I like about this industry, is that there's always a chance to do new things, despite the fact you may not be part of BioWare anymore. You're going to do something different. So I wish everybody luck. I talk to those guys all the time at the studio now, and they're definitely embracing this challenge and definitely really investing themselves in how they overcome this and how they get around this innovator's dilemma. Keep what you love, but at the same time, find a new expression of that for a market that is changing and evolving. So now that I've been out of the studio for 3 months, I've had just the tremendous fortune to be invited in to a few other organizations and learn what they're doing. Everybody has been very gracious with their time, including yourselves, to have me down and speak about a few things around BioWare or my own perspectives on things. And so I thought I would share some things that I've learned that are more broadly, not so video game industry centric, but more broad about what I see happening in this province especially. I've talked to healthcare startups, I've talked to technology startups, I've talked to, although those things seem to be getting conflated a fair bit, I talked to one industrial startup actually, and they all have given me a few perspectives that I thought I would share now. So the first is that I really do believe this is a time of disruption in many industries, whether it's AI or whether it's virtual reality or augmented reality or whether it's the blockchain or whatever these big technologies that are sort of looming out there are starting to make their presence known. Many things are getting disrupted, and I wouldn't suspect that healthcare is any different. I would suspect that healthcare is probably due for a disruption. Things will change, things will adjust, things will push it in certain directions, and then that will eventually tip and will be disrupted, and all the pieces will be picking it up. I think what's important to remember about this disruption, though, is that we can face it optimistically or we can face it pessimistically. That's a choice. We can choose to be optimistic about it and embrace it and say it's coming, let's figure out how we get through it, or we can be pessimistic about it, we can deny that it's coming, we can say only bad things are going to come because of it. But that's a choice we make. So I would encourage us to take the optimistic path, that there is a way through this which we will all come out stronger for, we'll all be better for. Things will be better through this disruption if we do it smartly and if we play our cards right. The second thing I've learned since leaving the studio and spending more time out there in the province especially is I've been extremely impressed by not only the quality of the entrepreneurship that's happening right now, but also by the talent that we have here in the province. It is enormously talented, this province, and the people who are coming out of our universities, the people who are choosing to do business here in Alberta or staying in Alberta, coming to Alberta, are tremendously talented individuals, and they have all the skills I think they need to do amazing things and to really play their part in that global stage and to participate in this kind of global economy we have now and do amazing things here. I have no doubt about the level of their talent. But I do believe that talent needs to be nurtured and supported. I do think there needs to be government support, organizational support, community support. I read a quote from Jesse Owens who said that no one has reached the pinnacle without a tremendous community behind them and a lot of support behind them, and I really believe that. It does take a lot of people to support entrepreneurs and people taking risks, and we need to support them in doing that. But the talent is there. Absolutely, the talent is there. It's amazing how talented they are. And then the last lesson is that I do believe that entrepreneurship is the way forward for a lot of these challenges. Embracing the idea of entrepreneurship and starting organizations, starting businesses, is how we're going to get through a lot of this. And so I would encourage everybody to embrace what our founders did at BioWare, which is take some risks, face some uncertainty, but trust that you have the skills and talent to get it done. And then work with your community around you to be supported and to be open to that support, and then ultimately to succeed and thrive through this disruption. I think entrepreneurship is going to be how we're going to get through this disruption more successfully and more strongly than we went into it with. So with that, thank you very much. I'll leave you with two quotes that I think are really important. Everyone thinks of changing the world, but no one thinks of changing himself. I think that's really true, and I would challenge. I'm certainly doing a lot of time since leaving the studio thinking about myself and things that I want to do and things that I want to try to be better at. And then lastly, the role of courage in leadership. Walt Disney said, "Courage is the main quality of leadership, in my opinion, no matter where it is executed. Usually it implies some risk, especially new undertakings." But I would encourage everybody to be courageous about this time and to take on as much courage as you can. Use your friends, draw strength and courage from your friends, and get out there and win. So thank you very much.